People expect laughter when they turn on a Steve Harvey show. They expect jokes, fast punchlines, big smiles, noise, energy. They do not expect silence. But on this day, silence arrived before the first word was spoken. Steve Harvey stood on stage, holding his cue card, but not reading from it. He was watching a man seated across from him. Not a celebrity, not a politician, not a performer, a war veteran. No dramatic introduction, no long list of achievements, no heroic music. Just a man sitting very still, too still. His posture was straight in a way that didn't come from confidence, but from habit, from years of learning that relaxing could cost lives. Steve Harvey had interviewed thousands of people in his career. He could feel humor. He could feel tension. And right now, the tension was heavy. "This is different," Steve said quietly. The audience laughed out of instinct, and then stopped. Steve didn't smile. "You asked to be here today?" Steve continued. "You didn't come to promote anything. You didn't come to tell a feel-good story." The veteran nodded once. "I came to talk about war," he said. Just one sentence, and the room changed. Steve lowered his card. "Most of us," Steve said, "think we understand war." The veteran didn't interrupt. "We've seen movies," Steve continued, "read headlines, heard speeches about courage and sacrifice." Steve paused. "But you lived it." The veteran looked down at his hands, hands that didn't shake, but looked like they remembered how. "Tell me," Steve said, "what people get wrong." The veteran was quiet for several seconds. The silence stretched long enough to feel uncomfortable. "That pause," the veteran said finally, "is part of it." Steve didn't speak. "People think war is chaos from the start," the veteran continued. "Explosions, screaming, action." He shook his head slowly. "No." His voice was steady but low. "War begins quietly." The audience leaned forward without realizing it. "You wake up before dawn," he said. "The air is still. Too still." He swallowed. "And your body already knows something your mind doesn't want to admit." Steve listened carefully. "You feel your heartbeat in your throat," the veteran said. "Every sound feels too loud. Every shadow feels alive." He looked up. "That's when you realize something," he said. "This isn't a movie." Steve nodded. "You're trained to move," the veteran continued, "to follow orders, to react faster than thought." He paused. "They don't train you to feel." A few people in the audience exchanged looks. "I was young," the veteran said. "Younger than most people watching this right now." He let that sit. "I believed what I was told," he continued, "that it was necessary, that it mattered, that it would end, and I would come home the same." Steve's jaw tightened slightly. "But war doesn't end," the veteran said softly. "It just changes locations." The sentence landed hard. "I came home alive," he said, "and everyone told me how lucky I was." He exhaled. "But they didn't know what followed me back." Steve asked quietly, "What followed you?" The veteran hesitated. "Sounds," he said. "Faces. Moments that replay whether you want them to or not." He stared straight ahead. "No one warns you," he said, that your mind will keep fighting long after your body is safe. The studio was silent now. No coughs, no movement. I used to think bravery meant not being afraid. The veteran continued. War taught me something else. Steve leaned closer. What's that? He asked. That fear never leaves, the veteran said. You just learn to operate with it sitting on your chest. He placed a hand over his heart. That weight, he said. It stays. Steve didn't respond right away. And in that silence, the audience began to understand something. This wasn't a story. It was a warning. The veteran took a slow breath before continuing. There's a moment, he said, that changes everything. Steve didn't interrupt. It doesn't happen all at once, the veteran explained. It sneaks up on you. He looked at the floor. You arrive believing you're prepared, he said. You've trained. You've practiced. You've been told exactly who you are. He raised his eyes. But war doesn't care who you think you are. The audience remained motionless. My first combat zone, he continued, didn't look like the movies. He let out a quiet, almost humorless breath. There were no epic speeches, no slow-motion hero shots. He paused. Just confusion. Steve nodded slowly. You don't know where danger is coming from, the veteran said. You don't know who's watching. You don't know who's afraid. His voice lowered. And fear makes people unpredictable. The veteran rested his elbows on his knees. The first time shots were fired, he said, I didn't think. He tapped his temple lightly. That's what training does. It removes thinking. The audience tensed. I reacted, he said, as I was taught. A pause. And then everything went quiet again. Steve felt his stomach tighten. That silence afterward, the veteran continued, is worse than the noise. He swallowed. Because that's when reality catches up. He lifted his head. You look around. You realize someone isn't standing anymore. The room felt smaller. I remember staring at my hands, he said. They didn't look different. He paused. But everything else was. Steve's voice was barely above a whisper. Was that the first time? He asked. The veteran nodded. Yes. That was all he said. The weight of the word settled deeply. They don't tell you, the veteran continued, how fast a human life can disappear. He rubbed his palms together. One moment someone is breathing. The next they aren't. He hesitated. And it becomes your job to move on. Steve closed his eyes briefly. You're taught, the veteran said, that hesitation gets people killed. He looked around the studio. So you learn to shut parts of yourself off. He tapped his chest. Empathy, doubt, regret. A bitter smile flashed across his face. You store them away for later. Steve asked gently, and later comes, when? The veteran laughed quietly. That's the problem, he said. Later always comes. The audience shifted slightly, still silent. During combat, he continued, your world shrinks. He held his hands apart narrowly. This much space, he said. This much time. Steve followed his gesture. All you focus on, the veteran said, is the next second. He paused. You survive 1 second, he said. Then another. He shook his head. And somehow, Years passed like that. He straightened slightly. People back home, he said, talk about bravery. He looked directly at Steve. I didn't feel brave, he said. I felt terrified. Steve nodded slowly. But I did what I was told. The veteran took another breath. And the worst part, he continued, is how normal it starts to feel. The audience stiffened. Violence, he said, becomes routine. His voice hardened slightly, and that should scare everyone. Steve leaned forward. Why? He asked. Because when killing becomes normal, the veteran said, something inside humanity breaks. Silence. I watched good people change, he continued. Not overnight. Gradually. He stared into the distance. They slept less, joked less, trusted less. He exhaled, and some of them never came back, even though they survived. Steve remained quiet. I remember one night, the veteran said, when everything stopped. He paused. No shooting, no orders. The room leaned in. We sat there, he said, waiting. He looked down, and that's when it hit me. He raised his eyes. If I make it home, he said, I won't be the same person who left. The silence deepened. That realization, he said, hurt more than any wound. Steve finally spoke. And yet, he said, people still call you heroes. The veteran nodded slowly. I know, he said, and I understand why. He paused. But heroism, he said, doesn't erase damage. The words echoed quietly. And war, he finished softly, creates damage everywhere it touches. The veteran shifted slightly in his chair. Not from discomfort, from memory. There are names, he said, that never leave you. Steve stayed silent. Not because you try to remember them, the veteran explained, but because your mind refuses to let them go. He looked toward the audience. People think soldiers forget, he said. That time makes things fade. He shook his head. No. His voice dropped. Time makes things sharper. The studio lights felt too bright now. There was a man, the veteran continued, who slept beside me for months. He paused. We shared food, stories, jokes about home. A faint smile appeared, then vanished. He talked about opening a garage, the veteran said, about fixing old cars. He swallowed. One day, he didn't wake up. Steve inhaled quietly through his nose. No warning, the veteran said. No goodbye. He stared forward. Just an empty space where a human being used to be. The audience barely breathed. That's when guilt starts, he said. Steve looked up. Guilt? He asked softly. The veteran nodded. Survivor's guilt, he said. It doesn't ask permission. He placed a hand against his chest. It asks questions. He paused. Why him? Why not me? What did I do differently? His voice tightened. And the worst one, a long pause. What right did I have to live? The silence was unbearable. You don't say that out loud, the veteran said. You carry it quietly. He looked at Steve. Because no one wants to hear it. Steve didn't argue. Commanders tell you to stay focused, the veteran continued. That dwelling on loss is dangerous. He nodded. They're right. He paused. But so is ignoring it. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Every loss, the veteran said, takes a piece of you. He gestured inward. And sooner or later, you start to notice what's missing. Steve leaned forward. What do you notice first? He asked. The veteran didn't answer immediately. Your reactions change, he said slowly. Your humor darkens. Your patience shortens. He paused. And your heart. He shook his head. It builds walls. He looked up. You stop letting people matter, he said, because caring hurts too much. A few people in the audience wiped their eyes. I remember looking at civilians. The veteran continued. People who lived where we fought. He exhaled. They were scared, he said, and I didn't know how to feel about that. He clenched his jaw. War blurs everything, he said. Right and wrong. Enemy and innocent. Steve listened intently. You start seeing threats everywhere, the veteran said. And once that switch flips, he paused. It doesn't flip back easily. Steve asked carefully, did you ever feel like you were losing yourself? The veteran nodded immediately. Yes, a single word, devastatingly honest. There was a moment, he said, when I didn't recognize my own thoughts. He stared down. I noticed how numb I felt, he continued, how little surprised me anymore. He exhaled sharply. That scared me more than bullets. The audience stayed frozen. Because numbness, he said, means something inside you has shut down. He straightened. And when that happens, he said, war has already won. Steve's face tightened. People talk about victory, the veteran continued, about winning battles. He shook his head slowly. But war's greatest victory, he paused, is what it takes from people quietly. Steve whispered, what did it take from you? The veteran closed his eyes briefly. Innocence, he said. Trust. He opened them again. And the ability to believe the world is mostly good. The room remained motionless. I came back alive, he said, but lighter. Steve frowned. Lighter, he asked. Yes, the veteran said, as if parts of me were left behind and never retrieved. He paused. That's when I understood something. He leaned forward. Surviving war, he said, is not the same as escaping it. The sentence echoed. And no uniform, he finished quietly, can protect you from that. Coming home is supposed to be the ending. That's what everyone believes. The veteran shifted slightly, as if the memory carried weight. They told me, he said, everything would feel normal again. He let out a slow breath. They were wrong. Steve listened without interrupting. The day I returned, the veteran continued, people smiled. He paused. They hugged me, clapped me on the back. A faint, bitter smile crossed his face. They called me a hero. The audience stayed quiet. But they didn't know, he said, that I was terrified. Steve's eyes widened slightly. Terrified? He repeated. Yes, the veteran said, because home was loud in a different way. He leaned forward. Cars, voices, unexpected movements. He swallowed. My body didn't understand peace. Steve nodded slowly. I remember walking into a grocery store, the veteran said. The aisles were narrow. He exhaled. My heart started racing. The audience leaned in. I couldn't explain it, he continued, but my body thought I was trapped. He rested his hands on his knees, so I left my cart and walked out. Steve frowned. That was the first time I realized, the veteran said. Something was wrong. He paused. Not broken, he corrected quietly. Changed. The veteran looked around the studio. At night, he said, I stopped sleeping. He laughed softly without humor. When I did fall asleep, he continued, I woke up exhausted. The audience shifted uncomfortably. People asked, he said, Did you see combat? He nodded slowly. I never knew how to answer. Steve asked gently, What did you want to say? The veteran looked at him. I wanted to say, he said, that combat never left. The room remained silent. It followed me into my home, he said, into my dreams. He shook his head. And it didn't come alone. Steve remained focused. Anger arrived first, the veteran continued. Then distance. He paused. I pushed people away without meaning to. He rubbed his hands together. Crowds felt dangerous, he said. Silence felt suspicious. Steve sighed quietly. I watched my family walk on eggshells, the veteran said, trying not to set something off. He lowered his gaze. That hurt more than anything. The audience felt it. I didn't have a name for it back then, he said. No one used words like PTSD around me. He shrugged. They just said I needed time. Steve nodded. But time, the veteran said, doesn't heal what you don't acknowledge. A long pause followed. I started isolating myself, he continued, because explaining felt impossible. He looked at Steve. How do you describe something, he asked, to people who've never lived it? Steve didn't answer. People expected gratitude, the veteran said. They expected pride. He shook his head. What they got was silence. He paused. They stopped asking questions after a while. The veteran leaned back. That's when loneliness really began. Steve pressed his lips together. At my lowest point, the veteran continued, I started to believe something terrible. The room tensed. I believed, he said, that the person I used to be was gone forever. Steve's voice was barely audible. And that scared you? The veteran nodded. Yes, he said, because war had already taken enough. He inhaled slowly. I didn't want it to take the rest. The silence felt thick. That's when I realized, the veteran said, that surviving the battlefield was only the first fight. He looked straight ahead. Coming home, he said, was the real war. The veteran didn't rush his next words. It felt like he was choosing them carefully, as if once spoken, they could no longer be taken back. For a long time, he said, I thought my struggle was a personal failure. Steve tilted his head slightly. I thought, the veteran continued, that I wasn't strong enough. He paused. That maybe everyone else came back fine, and I didn't. The audience listened closely. But the truth, he said quietly, is that war doesn't break a few people. He looked directly into the camera. It breaks everyone, he said, just in different ways. Steve nodded slowly. I started meeting other veterans, the man continued. Men and women who smiled in public and suffered in private. He exhaled. We all told different stories, he said, but the pain sounded the same. Steve leaned forward. What did you hear? He asked. Regret, the veteran said. Confusion. He paused. And questions with no answers. The room remained silent. One veteran told me, he continued, that he missed the war. A murmur rippled faintly through the audience. Not because it was good, the veteran explained, but because it made sense. He shook his head. In war, everything is clear, he said. Orders, rules, purpose. Steve listened intently. Coming home, the veteran said. The world feels chaotic. He spread his hands slightly. No clear mission, no obvious enemy. He paused. And no manual for how to be human again. The veteran took a breath. That's when I realized something larger, he said. This wasn't just about me. Steve raised his eyebrows slightly. It was about the way we talk about war. The veteran continued. The way we sell it. The audience stiffened. We package it as honor, he said. As necessity, as inevitability. He paused. But we rarely show the cost. Steve remained quiet. We show flags, the veteran said, but not funerals. He swallowed. We show parades, he continued, but not panic attacks at 2 a.m. The room felt heavy. We praise service, he said, but struggle to offer support when the uniforms come off. Steve nodded slowly. And that, the veteran said, is part of why war keeps happening. A few people shifted in their seats. Because distance makes it easier, the veteran continued. When suffering is abstract, decisions feel lighter. He leaned forward. But suffering is never abstract, he said. It has faces, names. His voice tightened slightly. And families who never recover. Steve drew a quiet breath. I'm not here, the veteran said, to say soldiers are victims without agency. He shook his head. We chose to serve, he said, and that choice matters. He paused. But so does honesty. Steve nodded. And honesty, the veteran said, means admitting that war solves very little and destroys much. The silence deepened. I started telling my story, he said, not because it was easy. He glanced at Steve, but because silence protects nothing. The audience absorbed the words. I spoke at schools, the veteran continued. Community centers. He exhaled. I watched young faces listen. Steve asked gently, and what did you tell them? The veteran didn't hesitate. I told them, he said, that courage isn't found in pulling a trigger. He paused. It's found in asking why before it's too late. Steve's eyes softened. I told them, the veteran continued, that violence may look powerful. He shook his head slowly. But it always comes back with interest. The studio remained absolutely still. And most importantly, he said, I told them this. He leaned slightly forward. War is bad, he said. Not because soldiers are weak, He paused, but because no human being was ever meant to carry it alone. The words hung in the air. Steve sat back slowly. For once he didn't know what to say. The silence in the studio was no longer uncomfortable. It was necessary. Steve Harvey looked out at the audience before speaking. "This," he said quietly, "is not the kind of conversation people expect." The veteran nodded. "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." Steve turned back to him. "Some people watching right now," Steve said, "will say war is unavoidable." He paused. "That it's just how the world works." The veteran listened carefully. "I don't disagree that conflict exists," he said. "But war is a choice made by people far from its consequences." The words cut deep. Steve inhaled. "If someone in power were listening right now," Steve asked, "what would you want them to understand?" The veteran didn't rush. "I would want them," he said, "to sit with a veteran at 3 a.m. The audience remained frozen. "To watch someone jump at a sound that isn't there," he continued. "To see the fear behind the silence." He paused. "And then I would ask them," his voice lowered, "is this the cost you're willing to pass on?" Steve nodded slowly. "You're not angry," Steve said. "You're warning us." The veteran nodded. "Yes," he said. "Anger burns fast." He paused. "But warnings last." Steve glanced at the audience. "I think," Steve said, "this is the first time we're not ending a show with applause." He looked back at the veteran. "Is that okay?" The veteran nodded again. "It should end like this," he said, "because war doesn't end cleanly." Steve stood up slowly. He placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "I thank you," Steve said, "not just for your service," he paused, "but for your courage to speak when silence is easier." The veteran lowered his head slightly. "Silence," he said softly, "is what allows war to repeat itself." The camera began to pull back. No music played. No one clapped. People stayed seated, thinking. The veteran looked directly into the camera one last time. "If you remember anything from today," he said, "remember this." He paused. "War is not a headline." Another pause. "It's not a slogan." A breath. "It's a lifetime of consequences paid by people who never signed the orders." The room felt suspended in time. "When you hear calls for war," he continued, "listen carefully to what's missing." He leaned forward slightly. "You will never hear the sounds that follow soldiers home." The final silence stretched. "This," he finished, "is why war is bad." The camera faded to black, and no one rushed to speak, because some truths deserve quiet.